Operation 911. I'm here at the farmer's market, and there's lots of great fresh produce. I'm interested in canning some of it and saving it for the winter. Can you show me where to find some good recipes for canning?
Hi, Mackenzie. Thank you for your questions on how to find safe canning recipes. So first of all, I want to say that the science matters when it comes to canning safely. So there are some recipes, sources that we do not recommend. So for example, this is an old version of the Ball Blue Book. This has been around for a long time, but this is an older version that has some information in it that's not recommended to use anymore. Another example would be this family cookbook, and this has some canning recipes, and you just don't know whether they've been tested for safety. So to give you some examples of some good resources to use, this is the USDA Complete Guide to Home Canning, an excellent resource for just the basics on water bath canning and pressure canning. This is an example of our publications from K-State Research and Extension. This one is on preserving apples, and it talks about canning and freezing apples. This is another one that's from the University of Georgia. It's called So Easy to Preserve. This also has all the USDA recipes in it, but it also has freezing and dehydrating and lots of information, frequently asked questions. It's a great educational book for canning and preserving. And then of course the Ball Blue Book. It's been around for a long time. This is the most recent version. Again, you want to use recipes that are newer than 1994, which is what this book is. And then also this book is also from Ball, which is called the Complete Book of Home Preserving. So with these resources here, I think you'll be well on your way to safe preserving.
So now that I have my ingredients, I'd like to make some zucchini relish. Can you tell me what kind of equipment I would need?
So the processing method that you will use is the water bath canning method. And that's also used for canning jams and jellies, fruits, all kinds of pickles, and tomato products and salsas. So first let me talk about the basic equipment that you will need. A funnel really helps you get the food in the jar without spilling it onto your countertop. The next tool that's handy is a bubble freer, and this also measures your headspace. So once you've filled your jar, you put this down inside there to get the excess air out, and then you measure your headspace, and this varies by the type of food that you're canning. The third tool that's really handy is this. It's a jar lifter, and this grips under the jar and helps you safely get your jars in and out of the hot water. As far as jars are concerned, you want to use the size of jar that's appropriate for that recipe. You never want to use a jar larger than what the recipe calls for. So you can reuse jars, make sure they're clean, free of any chips or cracks. Always run your finger around the rim so that you have a nice smooth rim of the jar. Canning rings can be reused as well as jars, but once these start getting rusty, then it's time to repurpose them. Once they get rusty, they get harder to take on and off. And then lids should always be new. These are used once. And today's lids do not need to be preheated. Just simply wash them with soapy water and dry them, and then you're ready to use them. So for the canner, it's simply a big stock pot with a lid, and then you need some kind of rack. And this is the style of rack that comes with this one. Now, if you have a stock pot at home, this might fit it. You want to measure it. You can buy these separately, so that would work for that. Or you can make your own. Take some of those old rusty canning rings and tie them together and set this on the bottom of your stock pot. And then to test how tall your stock pot is, you'll want to put the jars inside of there, and you want to make sure that the water covers the top of the jars by at least 1 inch. We have a how-to guide on water bath canning, and this will help guide you through all the steps for safe canning of your water bath products. So we wish you lots of success and enjoy your zucchini relish. Let's say you found some fresh green beans at the farmer's market. So fresh green beans must be pressure canned, and the same is true for all plain vegetables and for any kind of meats. So I want to talk to you about two styles of pressure canners that can be used. Both of these are the same brand. These are Presto canners. This one is a weighted gauge canner. This is a dial gauge canner. In general, most of the features on these are the same except for two specific differences. So on the bottom, it looks like this. It has a bump out on it. And this particular brand of canner works very well on a flat top stove. On the inside of the canner, you will see a rack that looks like this. Again, that's to keep your jars from touching the bottom of the canner. On the underside of the lid, you'll see it has a rubber gasket. You always want to double check that every year. Make sure it's clean, make sure it's pliable and free of cracks. And then also check the overpressure plug. Again, it needs to be pliable. Both of those can be replaced if you need to. You can get replacement parts for that. The other thing to check is the vent pipe. Make sure it's clean and clear. No food stuck up inside the pipe. Over here on this side is the pressure indicator, and when pressure is building inside the canner, this will pop up, and it also locks the lid on. So once you get your jars inside the canner, you'll put the lid on and turn it. It only goes on one way, locks it onto the canner, and then you will let the steam come out of the vent tube for 10 minutes, and then you'll put the weight on. And this is a 3-piece weight. The stem by itself is 5 pounds. You add a ring to make it 10 pounds, and then you add the second ring to make it 15 pounds. How much weight you use depends on your altitude of where you are located and where you're doing your canning. Once this is vented for 10 minutes, you put the weight on, build up the pressure, and once this starts to gently rock, that's when you start your processing time. And it must gently rock throughout that whole time. As far as the dial gauge canner, it functions exactly the same as this, except you're measuring the pressure with the dial gauge. If you have one of these, you need to get it tested every year to make sure it's accurate, and contact your local extension office and they can help you get the gauge tested. The counterweight that's over here that sits on top of the vent pipe just sits there and helps the pressure build inside the canner. It typically doesn't rock, it just sits there. Otherwise, both these canners work the same. Now, this style of canner can be used on a flat top stove, such as this one here. Again, you want to follow your manufacturer's directions on whether you can can or not. Same is true with water bath canners. If you have a flat stove, you want to make sure that your water bath canner is completely flat. For more instructions on how to do pressure canning, we have a how-to guide over here to step you through all of the important steps you need to do for pressure canning. And then for more information on how to adjust for your altitude, we have a publication called What's Your Elevation? Electric pressure cookers are intended to be used for cooking. We do not recommend these be used for canning. And the reasons why is we truly just don't know what pressure they really reach on the inside. And more importantly, we don't know if they reach the proper temperature for pressure canning. Pressure canning temperature needs to reach at least 240 to 250 degrees. And we just don't know that. So stick to using this appliance for cooking a family meal. Some other methods that we don't recommend using is one that's called the open kettle method, where you fill your jar with your hot food, put the lid and ring on it, turn it upside down on your counter, and then turn it back side up. You miss out on the final heat processing step, which could be critical for safety. Along with this, a similar method is the sun canning method, where you fill your jars, put the lids and rings on, and set them outside in the sun for days. Again, this is an inconsistent heat process, and it could lead to unsafe food. A couple other methods we do not recommend is using your dishwasher to process full jars of food, or your oven to process your food. The oven method is a dry heat, and actually the jars could crack inside the oven. These jars are not tempered for dry heat. So stick to using the water bath canning method for your high acid foods and the pressure canning for your low acid foods, which is your plain vegetables and meats, and you'll end up with a lot of safe, great tasting food. So we hope that all of this information will guide you to successful canning.